Hey guys, this is Phil. I was recently on Dribble and I noticed my good friend Noah that he posted this shot here, and in one of his first comment here, he talks about how he still needs to pixel hint the branding, and there were a couple of questions about what in the world he was talking about. He kind of clears up and kind of says, he needs to clean up the pixels from the transition from Illustrator to Photoshop, crisp edges, details, yada yada. So, some people asked, how do you do that? And kind of, I guess, wanted him to elaborate more on that. So I figured I'd jump in here because this is something I do fairly regularly, and it's pretty common whenever you're obviously working with vector data in the 72 dpi Photoshop document that you're going to have, you're obviously going to need to clean up your vector objects, your vector shapes, and when you're working from Illustrator to Photoshop, there's different ways you can bring in your content, and especially if you're working with a client logo, you're going to want that to look as good as possible. And so you can copy things over as a smart object, which allows you to jump straight in there, which reopens Illustrator, make edits, save, and updates in your Photoshop comp. I'm not really going to cover that because typically when I'm working with logos or anything that's kind of vector-based information from Illustrator, I like to copy straight over as shape objects, and I'll go into details of why I like to do that. But especially with this logo thing here, how do you clean up some of that anti-aliasing that's going on in the edges and really make this much more crisp? So let me jump over here to Illustrator. Noah was kind enough to provide the Gunway logo so we can kind of keep consistency here based on his original shot. It's provided in a lot of different options, and I've already got a Photoshop document happening here that just kind of somewhat replicates the layout that he had in his comp. And again, what you could do is you can select this and do a copy and paste straight into Photoshop, and it would ask if you want to copy it as, save it as pixels or as a smart object, or you have different options. But instead of doing this, I'm going to bring these over as separate layers. So what I want to do is I want to ungroup this, but I want to bring over this this Gunway, just this type here, as a shape layer. So if I just copy that, just Command C into Photoshop and paste, and I've got my options here. I'm going to select this as a shape layer and hit OK. Now I've got this as it's coming in here as red, but we want to make it white because we want to make it as obviously just like the logo. And I don't know if this is exactly the same red, but I'm going to go ahead and just use it, and have a draw that background rectangle for the logo here. Make that red, and then let's drag the Gunway logo up here. Here we go. Now, what I want to do is I want to bring this up and kind of start sizing it down, just using the free transform here, just scaling this thing down. All right. So, this is a shape layer. I've got the logo here. You might want to go ahead and name it, just so I can keep track. And what's nice is that this is still a, obviously I've got all the vector data and the vector points and everything are now in Photoshop, but I'm able to jump in and make fine-tune the edges here. Whereas if I were to bring this in as a smart object, I don't have that fine tuning abilities. I don't have the ability to get in there and really tweak those edges. Even it gives me the ability, yes, to jump back into Illustrator, but I kind of find that almost adds extra steps and just is more inflexible. If you were working with a logo that had a lot more detail, was obviously fairly complex, a lot of information, copying all those individual pieces over and reconstructing that is just a waste of time. But I tend to find that this problem really happens with more of the simplistic single flat color logos, or if there's gradients or something, you can always recreate those fairly easily in Photoshop. And again, this is just giving you a lot more flexibility to be able to get in and really fix these edges. So now that I've got it in here, as a separate object, essentially what we're going to do is zoom up in on it, and with my arrow tool, I want to have the direct selection tool, the white arrow. This is, again, coming from Illustrator, this is going to be fairly common. This is what's going to give you the ability to select your points and come in here and actually click on these things and drag your vector, your anchor points around. And as we zoom in really close, and if you're new to Photoshop or you haven't been in for a long time, become very comfortable with being this closely zoomed in up on your in your comps. I mean, in your work. So I live here all the time, and I kind of joke that I am most happy when I'm living up about 3,200% zoomed in. I mean, I'm at 1,600. Let's go all the way in. Just because this is really where the details shine, and you're dealing with pixels here. You're dealing with 72 DPI images. And just artwork that you're really going to need to get in at this macro level at some point, and just clean things up. And it's amazing how these crisp edges really really aid in a successful design. I think just the fidelity of the design. So I'm not going to go through and do this whole thing, but you can see that as I've pasted this here, we've got vector points that are sitting midway between pixels, and it's creating all this anti-aliasing going on. So kind of a quick way to fix this is to kind of before we get into each point, is to go ahead and select all the shapes of the logo here, and again zoom back in. And using the arrow tool, we can nudge. So we're going to nudge this thing up, kind of nudge it over a bit. And you want maybe use this line here of these letter forms to sit on a whole pixel. And already these top forms of these letter forms are really, really crisp. The bottoms down here are not so much, but we can either adjust or we can scale this thing up just a little bit. I'm actually going to do that. I'm going to do a Command T again to transform. And I'm going to kind of just scale this guy up and kind of get this edge here a little cleaned up. Top edge up here, let's kind of bring this back up. And it's a lot of scaling, a lot of repositioning on the pixel grid here. This stuff up here is still looking pretty good. You'll notice that even sometimes vector points will start to drift off of these grid lines, but it's not starting to add in the alias anti-alias pixels here. Sometimes that doesn't quite kick in immediately, so you have a little wiggle room there, a little room to move. You just want to kind of check all your edges here, and keep looking here as you transform stuff. That's looking pretty good. Go ahead and commit the transform by just double clicking on it. We can zoom out. Let's just see how we're doing. This is looking better. It may be a little hard to see in the video, but this top line right at the top of the U, N, W, A, and Y is nice and sharp. The bottom line is still a little fuzzy, so let's zoom back in. And what you're going to want to do here is a little tricky, because you want to be obviously true to the logo. That you're dealing with, this is actual branding material from your clients, and you don't want to start altering these letter forms in a drastic way to where they actually start to deteriorate or to differ greatly from the original artwork. So we're talking minor adjustments, and ultimately you're going to want to have probably an original copy and then an adjusted copy, and you want to compare the two so you can see just how far you've wandered and how far you've adjusted things. And again, someone who's looking at this fresh probably not going to notice that the logo has been slightly tweaked. But again, you're dealing with some very valuable intellectual property, or whatever you call a logo here. You want to make sure that you're not really, I guess, breaking the rules. You want to make sure that you're staying within that. So, but what I would do here is I'd look at this U, and I'd see that hey, this is kind of this thing here. There's a little subpixel anti-aliasing going on here. That's not that noticeable, but this line here is really causing some problems. So we can come in here, select these anchor points, and just we can either bump them out or we can bump them in. What you want to do is maybe not go all the way. You don't want everything to be perfectly pixelated and 100%, because that's going to start really having the wrong effect. But just kind of knock that back a bit, so it's going to make this edge look a little bit sharper. Let's go ahead and select these bottom points here all the way across, and just kind of gently bring that up a little bit. Again, kind of doing the same thing. We don't want to get too crazy. And you're just going to go letter form by letter form, and you're just going to kind of nudge these things in. I just kind of wander across across these things and adjust. And as you're doing this, you're going to be cleaning up this stuff. And you can kind of bring this in just a little bit. Again, don't get too worried about making them all fit on the grid, because it's just all letter forms are going to be different, and we're not dealing with pixelated type here. We're just trying to get this to look a little bit sharper. And we zoom out, and this U is already starting to stand out from the group, and you can tell that it's much crisper. On these curves here, you're going to have a lot of, it's going to look a little bit softer. And, you can fix this to a degree. Really, it's all a matter of looking at each pixel, looking at, this is white, so you're going to see the different tones and the different levels of transparency applied to each pixel here. And you could always adjust this curve slightly to make it a little bit more hard-edged. I kind of tend to not do that, because again, you're really starting to mess with the letter form, and again, it's a balance. It's a balance between all of this stuff. Anyway, so that's that's going to take some time. I'm not going to spend the whole time doing that, but I would go through this whole logo, and I would literally adjust all those things and get them sitting pretty well to where this thing's just crisps up. Another quick thing that you can do is, we've got one copy of this Gunway logo here. If I were to duplicate this, just Command J, essentially any anti-aliased or pixel here that's sitting not on the pixel grid and is slightly transparent has now been basically doubled on top of itself. You can kind of see that thickening happening. This can sometimes help you. I would not do it until I've gone through each letter and really cleaned it up, just because it's now almost kind of boldening, or I guess kind of making the logo look a little bolded, and that's not the effect. It'll kind of, again, start really messing with the integrity of the logo. But after I've gone through and cleaned up each letter, and some of those areas that are still a little soft, if I want those to be a little bit sharper and have more contrast along the edge, you can always duplicate the layers here, and you can always set this to maybe 50%, so it's just kind of halfway doubled. Get creative. Use multiple layers, kind of in different ways there to kind of beef up these pixels. And again, it's going to make a little bit stronger than just being such a soft edge. It's going to give it a little bit more of a sharpness along the edge. So that's the way I do it. I do this literally, I think, with every single logo. Most logos that I work with on client projects are, there's always a single color option, or I tend to kind of go that way. And then again, if it's something complex, you're not going to want to use this route. You're going to want to copy it in as either bitmap data or smart object from Illustrator, and work with it that way. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of value and insight into how you would clean up those edges. But again, if you've got a really complex logo like that, those edges I tend to find aren't as noticeable as these single color, or flat based, logo forms. And so, when you're dealing with something like this, even if this was a, 2-color, 3-color logo with it had 3 different shapes, or elements to it, and you could divide it up by color, what I would do is I'd copy over the full logo first. I would drop that into Photoshop, and that would be my guide. And then I would go over to Illustrator and I'd copy each piece individually, and then reassemble it as 3 separate shape layers, and get it all lined up to where everything's back in proportion and relationship that matches the logo, and then start adjusting from there. It's a little tedious, but as Noah said, it's all in the details, and you're gonna wanna spend the time to get this stuff cleaned up, especially when you're dealing with the logo for your client. And if you're dealing with something like you're having to create an avatar for maybe different sizes, you're having to create favicons and all that, and you're having to deal with different sizes for maybe a logo mark, you're going to have to go at each size and adjust those points, because as you size something down, it's going to kind of wander or shift, based on what you're scaling down those different versions to. And there's no way around it. This is just part of the gig. You're going to have to get in there and clean those things up, and it really goes a long way if you spend the extra time doing it. So I hope that's been helpful, and thanks for watching, guys.